It wasn't supposed to be permanent. When a werewolf pup first shifts, they're meant to dance between forms, human one moment, wolf the next, learning the rhythm of their dual nature like a heartbeat. But Caleb, heir to the Iron Claw throne, hadn't been human in 3 years. The great hall reeked of roasted venison and something darker, the sharp, metallic tang of cruelty that had soaked into the stone walls over decades. Alpha King Osric ruled from a throne carved from jagged basalt, his presence a shadow that devoured light. His beard was oil black, streaked with silver like claw marks, and his eyes held the cold calculation of a man who measured worth in bone density and kill counts. In werewolf society, the pack structure isn't just social, it's biological. Alphas emit pheromones that command obedience, their very presence triggering submission responses in lower-ranked wolves. A pack's strength is measured by the alpha's ability to dominate, and weakness, real or perceived, can trigger challenge rituals that end in death. This ancient system has governed werewolf packs for millennia, creating rigid hierarchies where power is the only currency that matters. The Iron Claw pack lived by one law: strength conquers all. Warriors wore their scars like medals, children learned to fight before they learned to read, and the weak, they were cast out into the Shadowlands, where rogues and worse things waited. At the foot of Osric's throne, curled into a tight ball of tawny fur, lay the pack's greatest shame: Caleb. The pup was small, unnaturally so for a royal bloodline. Where other alpha heirs grew into hulking predators by age 10, Caleb remained trapped in a juvenile wolf form barely larger than a shepherd's dog. His fur was the color of autumn honey, matted and dull from neglect, but it was his eyes that told the real story: large, golden, and filled with a desperate intelligence that looked painfully human. The silent failure, they called him. The warriors spat the name like a curse. Mothers used him as a cautionary tale: eat your meat or you'll end up like the prince. Even the Omega servants, the lowest rank in the pack, stepped over him as though he were a piece of discarded furniture. Only one person looked at Caleb and saw something other than disappointment. Seraphina had been a maid in the royal household since she was 14, now 26, and invisible in the way servants learn to be. She had dark hair that she kept in a practical braid, calloused hands from years of scrubbing stone floors, and a face that might have been beautiful if it weren't so carefully neutral. She'd learned early that showing emotion in Osric's court was dangerous. But when she passed the pup in the corridors, when she saw him flinch from a kicked boot or tremble from hunger because someone had forgotten to feed him, something in her chest cracked open. She would leave scraps near his sleeping place. She would whisper soft words when no one was watching. And she saw what the others refused to see. Caleb wasn't weak. He was terrified. Every time someone approached, the pup's body went rigid with a fear that seemed far too knowing. His golden eyes would dart to doorways, to shadows, as though expecting something worse than mockery. And sometimes, late at night when Seraphina cleaned the halls, she heard him whimper, not from physical pain, but from something deeper, something buried. "Why doesn't he shift?" she'd once asked the head healer, an ancient woman named Morda. Morda had looked at her with rheumy eyes and said, "Some wolves get stuck between forms when they experience trauma." The boy's mother died screaming. Perhaps his wolf won't let go because his human side doesn't want to remember. It made sense. It was also completely wrong. Have you ever been underestimated because of something beyond your control? Drop a comment below. I read every single one. If you're ready to see what's really wrong with this pup, hit that like button. Trust me, you won't see this twist coming. The winter solstice feast arrived like an executioner's blade, gleaming, ceremonial, and absolutely merciless. Torches blazed in iron sconces, casting shadows that danced across the great hall like restless spirits. The long tables groaned under the weight of tribute. Whole roasted boars, flagons of blood wine, platters of game birds arranged in patterns that resembled battle formations. This wasn't a celebration, it was a demonstration. Every year, the solstice marked the moment when Osric reaffirmed his dominance over the pack. Warriors would display their hunt kills, young wolves would fight in exhibition matches, and the alpha would stand before his people and prove, once again, that he was worthy of the throne. The hall filled with bodies, 300 wolves in human form, their eyes still carrying that predatory gleam that never quite disappeared. The air thickened with competing scents, musk, leather, the sharp ozone smell of barely contained violence. Pack dynamics were a living thing here, constantly shifting, constantly testing. Osric stood at the head table, magnificent in his brutality. He wore a cloak made from the pelts of rival alphas he'd killed in challenge fights, each fur a trophy, each death a warning. His voice, when he spoke, didn't need to be loud, it simply was. "My wolves," he began, and the hall fell silent, with the kind of obedience that comes from fear, not love. "Tonight we honor strength. Tonight we celebrate the iron in our blood, the fire in our hearts, the dominance that has made Ironclaw the most feared pack in 7 territories." Cheers erupted, fists pounded on tables. The sound was thunder. "We do not tolerate weakness," Osric continued, his eyes scanning the crowd like a predator selecting prey. "We do not shelter the frail. We do not—" His gaze dropped to the small, tawny-furred pup cowering at the base of his throne. The hall followed his stare. The cheering died like a snuffed candle. "We do not," Osric said, his voice dropping to something cold and surgical, "make excuses for failure, even when that failure shares our blood." Caleb didn't move, but Seraphina, standing in the shadows near the servants' entrance with a tray of goblets, saw the pup's ears flatten against his skull. She saw the tremor that ran through his small body. "Well," Ostric's voice cracked like a whip, "we're waiting, girl." Seraphina's fingers touched the soft fur of Caleb's back, and the pup began to tremble so violently she could feel it in her bones. What do you think the pup is trying to warn her about? Wrong answers only. Let's see your wildest theories. Subscribe if you want to see what happens when she starts grooming. The next part will break your heart. The pup's fur was softer than Seraphina expected. For something so neglected, the texture under her fingers felt almost unnaturally fine, like spun silk that had been deliberately dirtied to hide its quality. She worked the comb gently through the outer layer, acutely aware of 300 pairs of eyes watching her every movement. Someone coughed, someone else shifted in their seat. The silence was the kind that devours sound, that makes every small noise feel obscene. The hall was so quiet she could hear Caleb's heartbeat. It was racing. "Thoroughly," Osric said from above, his tone carrying that edge of sadistic pleasure. "We wouldn't want to miss any imperfections." Seraphina moved the comb along the pup's shoulders, down toward the spine. The fur here was thicker, matted in places that suggested it hadn't been properly groomed in months, maybe years. She worked slowly, carefully, trying to be gentle even as her own heart hammered against her ribs. The pup was still trembling. His breathing had gone shallow and rapid, the kind of panicked rhythm that precedes either fight or flight. But he didn't move. He couldn't. Not here. Not in front of the entire pack. Not with Osric looming above like a storm waiting to break. Seraphina worked the comb deeper into the fur along his spine, where the coat was thickest. And then the comb caught. Not on a tangle, not on a mat of dried mud or a burr from the forest. on something hard. The silver teeth of the comb scraped against metal with a sound that made her stomach drop, a tiny, almost inaudible ting that nonetheless seemed to echo in her skull. She froze. Caleb went absolutely still beneath her hands, as though even breathing might trigger something catastrophic. Seraphina glanced up. The Alpha King was leaning forward on his throne, his eyes locked on her face with the intensity of a predator that knows the kill is coming. He wasn't angry. He was watching her discover something he already knew. And in that moment, Seraphina understood. He'd been waiting for this. Her voice came out as a whisper. What is... But she couldn't finish the sentence, because as she stared at the blackened wires embedded in the pup's flesh, at the pattern they formed, at the deliberate, meticulous cruelty of their placement, her mind finally supplied the word she'd been avoiding: torture. This wasn't an injury. This was something done to him, on purpose. Warning. The next chapter contains details about dark magic that some viewers might find disturbing, but if you want to understand the full horror of what was done to this pup, keep watching. Smash that like button if you're as horrified as I am right now. This gets so much worse. Seraphina's fingers moved without conscious thought, parting more of the fur, following the pattern of wires. Her medical knowledge, limited to treating minor wounds and burns in the servant quarters, was screaming that this was wrong, impossible, an abomination. The wires formed a complete network across the pup's back, starting at the base of his skull and running down his spine in parallel lines before branching out across his shoulders and ribs like roots seeking purchase. Each wire was anchored at multiple points, the blackened metal disappearing into the flesh and presumably wrapping around... Her breath hitched. Around the spine itself. "Suppression knots," whispered a voice from somewhere in the crowd. Old Morda, the healer, her ancient face gone pale as bone. "Moon's mercy, those are suppression knots." The hall erupted in murmurs. Heads turned. The word spread through the gathered wolves like wildfire. Suppression knots. Suppression magic is the darkest practice in werewolf history, banned by the Council of Alphas nearly 4 centuries ago. The technique involves threading silver wire, the one metal toxic to werewolf physiology, through specific meridian points that connect a wolf's human consciousness to their animal form. When properly placed, these wires create a seal that prevents transformation. But that's not the worst part. The wires aren't just barriers, they're drains. Silver suppression knots continuously leach life force from the victim, slowly poisoning them while simultaneously preventing their wolf from breaking free. It's torture on a cellular level, a living death that can last for years. The practice was outlawed because its only purpose is prolonged suffering. Seraphina's vision blurred with tears she couldn't afford to shed. Not here, not now. She forced herself to look closer, to understand the full scope of what she was seeing. Between the wires, etched directly into the pup's skin with what must have been a silver-tipped blade, were runes, ancient symbols that glowed with a faint, sickly purple light, so dim she'd initially mistaken them for bruising. The runes pulsed in rhythm with Caleb's heartbeat, each pulse drawing something away from him, feeding it into the network of wires. They were draining him. Every heartbeat, every breath, every moment of his existence was being slowly, methodically stolen. This wasn't just preventing him from shifting, this was killing him. "How long?" Seraphina heard herself ask, her voice cracking. "How long has this been—" She stopped. Because there, carved into the largest knot at the base of the pup's skull, was a symbol she recognized. Every servant in the royal household knew it. Every wolf in Ironclaw had seen it stamped on official decrees, burned into the flesh of criminals, displayed on the Alpha's personal guard. The royal sigil of Osric, the crowned wolf's head with 3 claw marks beneath it. This wasn't the work of an enemy pack. This wasn't a curse from some rival alpha seeking to weaken Ironclaw's heir. This wasn't a tragic accident or a mysterious illness or any of the explanations she'd constructed in her mind to make sense of Caleb's condition. This was done by his own father. Seraphina's head snapped up, her eyes locking onto Osric's face. The Alpha King sat perfectly still on his throne, watching her with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing an experiment. He wasn't surprised by her discovery. He wasn't shocked or horrified or even pretending ignorance. He was satisfied. "You," the words scraped out of her throat, "you did this? You put these in him?" The hall went silent again, but this time the quality of the silence was different, dangerous. A servant had just accused the Alpha King of the highest crime imaginable, the torture of his own bloodline. Osric smiled. It was not a kind smile. "The boy's mother," he said conversationally, as though discussing the weather, "had a very interesting lineage. Did you know that, little maid? Her grandmother was celestial-born, ancient blood, the kind that breeds Titan alphas, wolves so powerful they can challenge multiple packs simultaneously, the kind that makes ordinary alphas look like pups." He stood, descending the steps from his throne with measured grace. "When Caleb was born, the seers told me what he would become. They said by age 10 he would outgrow me. By 15 he would be unstoppable. They said I should step aside gracefully, let the natural order take its course." His voice dripped venom. "I built this pack with blood and bone. I forged Ironclaw from 7 warring territories through sheer dominance. And they wanted me to hand it over to a child because of bloodline?" He reached the pup, crouching so his face was level with Caleb. The pup didn't move, but his golden eyes, those terribly human eyes, were fixed on his father with an expression that transcended fear and landed somewhere in the territory of soul-deep understanding. "He knows. He's always known. So I made a choice," he continued softly. "I could kill him outright, risk the wrath of the celestial bloodlines and the questions that would follow, or I could neutralize the threat, keep him alive but powerless, let the pack see him as the failure I needed him to be." His hand reached out and touched one of the wires. Caleb flinched, a barely audible whimper escaping his throat. "The suppression knots don't just seal his power," Osric smiled, widening. "They harvest it. Every bit of strength his celestial blood tries to produce gets drained into these wires and dispersed harmlessly into the earth. He's been feeding the soil beneath this castle for years." He laughed, actually laughed. "Isn't that poetic? The great Titan Alpha reduced to fertilizer." Seraphina felt something crack inside her chest, not breaking, transforming, fear crystallizing into something harder, sharper. "And when were you going to kill him?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tears now streaming down her face. Osric's smile faltered for just a moment, then returned, colder. "Tonight, actually. I was going to blame his death on raiders from the Shadow Ridge pack, use it to justify the expansion war I've been planning. Dead Prince makes for excellent propaganda." He tilted his head, studying Seraphina like she was a curious insect. "But now you've gone and complicated things." He stood, turning to address the hall. "This maid has discovered a royal secret. What should we do with her?" The question hung in the air like an executioner's axe, and in the silence that followed, Serafina made a decision that would change everything. 300 wolves stared at Serafina, waiting for Osric's judgment. Some looked hungry for violence, pack members who would gladly rip apart a servant to prove their loyalty. Others looked away, uncomfortable witnesses to something that crossed lines even they couldn't stomach. But it was Osric's gaze that pinned her in place. The Alpha King studied her with the clinical interest of a butcher examining meat. His head tilted slightly, and Serafina saw the calculation happening behind those cold eyes. He was weighing options, measuring risks, deciding whether she was worth killing quickly or slowly. "You have fire," he said finally, his tone almost conversational. "I appreciate that in my servants. Shows spirit, initiative." He took a step closer. "But fire must know when to bow to iron, girl, or it gets snuffed out." Serafina's knees wanted to buckle. Every survival instinct she possessed was screaming at her to submit, to lower her eyes, to beg forgiveness, and maybe she'd survive the night. That's what smart servants did. That's how you lived in a world ruled by predators. But her hand was still touching Caleb's fur, still feeling the tremors running through his small body, still sensing the heat of those suppression wires burning beneath the skin. And something inside her, something she'd kept buried under years of silent obedience, refused to look away. "You've been torturing him," she said quietly, not an accusation, a statement. A truth so obvious it didn't need volume. "You've been torturing him for years, your own son." "My burden," Osric corrected smoothly, "a necessary sacrifice for the good of the pack. Ironclaw needs a strong leader, not some celestial blood whelp who would tear apart everything I've built with misplaced mercy." He gestured to the gathered wolves. "Ask them, ask any alpha here, what would you do if your bloodline threatened your reign?" The question hung in the air like poison gas. Several wolves nodded, not all, but enough. Enough to show that Osric's logic, twisted as it was, held weight in a culture that measured everything by dominance and survival. In their world, eliminating threats wasn't evil, it was pragmatic. "The boy would have destroyed our way of life," he said, his voice rising to address the full hall now. "Titan alphas don't understand hierarchy. They don't believe in the natural order. They think power gives them the right to remake the world in their image, to tear down traditions that have kept packs strong for millennia." His fist clenched. "I've seen it before. Celestial bloods who tried to reform pack law, who wanted to give Omegas voting rights, who thought strength should be measured in compassion instead of combat." He spat the word compassion like it was a curse. "So yes," he said, turning back to Serafina, "I sealed my son's power before it could poison my pack. I turned him into a cautionary tale, a living reminder of what happens when bloodline alone isn't enough. And tonight, I was going to end his suffering and use his death to unite Ironclaw against our enemies." Serafina's mind raced through the implications. If Caleb died tonight and Osric blamed it on the Shadow Ridge pack, it would give him the justification to declare war. The other packs would rally behind him. No one ignored the murder of a royal heir, even a failed one. Osric would expand his territory, grow his power, and secure his reign for another generation. The plan was brilliant. It was also monstrous. "He's a child," Serafina heard herself say. "He's 10 years old." "He's a weapon," Osric snapped. "I defused it before it could detonate." The Alpha King pulled a long, curved obsidian dagger from his belt. The blade was black as midnight and sharp enough to split hairs. In werewolf culture, obsidian was reserved for executions. Its volcanic glass edge could sever the connection between human and wolf, ensuring the victim died in both forms simultaneously. A true death, no resurrection, no second chances. "I admire your courage, girl," Osric said, almost gently, "but courage without wisdom is just another word for suicide." He raised the dagger, and torchlight ran along its edge like liquid shadow. "The pup dies tonight as planned, and you'll die beside him as a traitor who attempted to interfere with royal justice." His eyes locked onto hers, and Serafina saw the truth there. He'd been planning this moment, maybe not specifically with her, but with someone. He needed a villain, a scapegoat, someone to blame for discovering the pup's condition too late, for failing to save him despite their best efforts. A servant dying beside the prince would add tragedy to his narrative. She was always meant to be part of the story, just not the part she chose. Serafina's hand, still resting on Caleb's back, felt the rapid flutter of his heartbeat through the fur. She felt the heat of those cursed wires burning beneath the skin. And something inside her, something she'd kept buried under years of silent obedience, refused to look away. "He's just a child," Serafina said, and drove the comb's teeth into the master knot with everything she had. For a single crystalline moment, nothing happened. The comb's silver teeth pierced the blackened knot, metal scraping against metal with a sound like a nail dragged across slate. Serafina felt resistance. The knot was dense, woven tight, designed to withstand years of strain. Her hand trembled from the pressure of pushing the comb deeper, breaking through layers of cursed silver that had fused with flesh and bone. Then the knot cracked. Not broke, not snapped. Cracked, like ice on a frozen lake when the weight becomes too much. Caleb's entire body went rigid. His golden eyes flew wide, pupils contracting to pinpoints. A sound emerged from his throat, not a howl, not a whimper, but something in between, something that held 3 years of silenced agony compressed into a single wavering note. Osric's expression shifted from theatrical authority to genuine alarm in the space of a heartbeat. "No," he started. The master knot shattered, and the world came apart. The shockwave hit Serafina first, a wave of pure, unfiltered energy that picked her up and threw her backward like a child's doll. She hit the stone floor 10 feet away, the impact driving the air from her lungs. Stars exploded across her vision. Her ears rang with a high, keening sound that might have been the air itself screaming. Through blurred vision, she saw Osric stumble back, his face twisted in something she'd never seen there before. Fear. The suppression wires, all of them, the entire network spanning Caleb's small body, lit up like lightning trapped under skin. The sickly purple glow intensified, brightened, turned white-hot. Where the wires had been embedded in flesh, the skin began to crack and peel away, not from decay, but from the sheer force of energy being released. Caleb was glowing. No, Caleb was burning, but not with fire, with light. Golden, terrible, ancient light that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than flesh, deeper than bone. It poured from his eyes, his mouth, the spaces between his fur. It turned the shadows in the great hall into fleeing things, banished them to the far corners where even torchlight couldn't reach. The pup's body began to convulse, his spine arched at an impossible angle, and then he started to grow. Educational moment. The truth about power seals. When a werewolf's transformation is suppressed for extended periods, their body doesn't stop producing the energy needed for shifting, it stores it. Like a dam holding back a river, the suppression knot creates a reservoir of accumulated power. In normal circumstances, this might result in a slightly stronger wolf when the seal is finally broken. But Caleb wasn't normal. Celestial bloodlines don't just store power, they compound it. Every day the seal held, every moment of suppressed transformation, the energy didn't just accumulate, it multiplied, it evolved, it became something other than what it started as. And when 3 years of Titan Alpha potential was released at all once, the results weren't just dramatic, they were cataclysmic. Back to the transformation. Caleb's juvenile wolf form, that small, tawny, furred body that had been kicked and mocked for years, began to crack like an eggshell. But what emerged wasn't the boy underneath. It was the god he was always meant to become. His legs extended, bones snapping and reforming with sounds like gunshots. His ribcage expanded, each breath drawing in more air than should fit in any living thing. His paws grew, claws extending until they were as long as daggers and glowing with that same golden light. The fur changed too. The dull honey color brightened, turned luminous, until it looked like he was covered in molten gold. Where the suppression wires had burned into his skin, new fur grew, thicker, stronger, marked with faint glowing symbols that looked like the inverse of the runes that had been carved into him. Healing by transformation, rewriting the curse into something holy. And he kept growing. 5 feet tall, 6, 7. The great hall, built to accommodate the largest of alpha wolves, suddenly felt too small. Caleb's head rose above the crowd, above the feasting tables, above even Osric's raised throne. His shoulders broadened until they seemed to fill the space from wall to wall. His presence became a physical thing, a pressure that pushed against everyone present like an invisible hand. Wolves throughout the hall began to drop to their knees, not from choice, from instinct. Their bodies recognized what their minds refused to accept. They were in the presence of something that sat at the apex of their species' hierarchy, a Titan Alpha, a creature that existed in their legends and myths but hadn't walked among them in generations. The kind of alpha that other alphas bowed to. Even Osric, proud, dominant, merciless Osric, felt his knees buckle. He caught himself on the edge of his throne, his knuckles white with the effort of staying upright. His wolf was howling inside, screaming submission, begging to roll over and expose its throat. "No," he snarled internally. "This is my pack, my throne, my." And when Caleb's eyes, no longer the soft gold of a frightened pup, but blazing like stars gone supernova, fixed on his father, and when he spoke, his voice was no longer silent. "Hello, Father." The words rolled through the hall like thunder, not shouted, not whispered, simply spoken with the weight of absolute authority. The transformation completed, the wires that had bound him lay scattered on the floor like dead snakes, their blackened metal turned to ash. Where they'd been embedded in flesh, golden scars remained, not marks of torture now, but badges of survival. Caleb stood before his father as he truly was, a wolf-man hybrid, nearly 9 feet tall, covered in shimmering gold fur, radiating power that made the air itself shimmer with heat. His muscles were defined like carved marble, his claws could rend stone, his teeth were white as bone and sharp as despair. He was magnificent, he was terrifying, and he was done being silent. The silence in the great hall was absolute. 300 wolves frozen in various states of submission, terror, and awe. Some had their faces pressed to the floor, unable even to look up. Others stared with expressions caught between reverence and horror, witnessing something their minds told them was impossible, but their instincts recognized as undeniable truth. Seraphina, still sprawled on the cold stone where the shockwave had thrown her, could only stare. The pup she'd tried to save was gone. In his place stood something out of legend. Caleb's transformation had stabilized, but the power radiating from him hadn't diminished. If anything, it had intensified, no longer explosive but controlled, focused, like a blade that had finished being forged and was now simply sharp. The golden light emanating from his fur had dimmed to a soft glow, but his eyes remained brilliant, burning with intelligence and awareness that seemed far older than 10 years. He moved with impossible grace for something his size. Each step was deliberate, controlled, the gait of a predator who'd never needed to rush because nothing in the world was fast enough to escape him anyway. The floor groaned under his weight, not from clumsiness, but from sheer mass, power compressed into physical form. He walked toward Osric. The Alpha King hadn't moved from his throne, couldn't move. His hand was still gripping the obsidian dagger, but the blade trembled in his grasp. Sweat had broken out across his forehead despite the winter chill. His eyes, those cold, calculating eyes that had ordered torture, planned murder, orchestrated years of cruelty, were wide with something Seraphina had never seen there: primal, animal fear. "You should run," Caleb said, his voice resonating in the chest of every wolf present. "That's what prey does when it realizes it's been cornered." Osric's lips pulled back in a snarl. Even terrified, even facing impossible odds, his pride wouldn't let him flee. You're still my son, still bound by blood law. You cannot." "Cannot what?" Caleb's massive head tilted, the gesture eerily similar to the pup's confused movements, but amplified to something far more predatory. "Cannot challenge you? Cannot defend myself? Cannot take what is rightfully mine by strength, which is, after all, the only law you've ever respected?" He took another step. The throne was 15 feet away, then 10. "I learned everything from you, Father," Caleb's voice carrying that strange duality, the mind of a child speaking with the authority of an ancient being. "I taught you that power is the only currency that matters, that the weak deserve their suffering, that cruelty is strength and mercy is weakness." 5 feet. "You taught me these lessons every day for 3 years. Every time you let your warriors kick me, every time you ordered the servants to forget my meals, every time you looked at me with disgust and told the pack I was worthless." Caleb loomed over the throne now, so large that Osric had to crane his neck back to maintain eye contact. The Alpha King looked small suddenly, fragile, human in a way that made the words sound like an insult. "But you taught me one more thing," Caleb said softly. "You taught me that some seals were never meant to be broken, because when you hold back a river for too long," he raised one massive paw, claws glinting in the torchlight, "the flood doesn't just fill the valley, it reshapes the entire landscape." Osric tried to shift. Seraphina saw it, saw his body convulse as he called to his wolf, demanded the transformation that should have been instantaneous for an alpha of his power. His muscles spasmed, his teeth elongated for a moment before retracting, fur sprouted in patches before disappearing again. His wolf refused to come, because his wolf knew. It knew that shifting wouldn't help, knew that in any form, Caleb was simply more powerful, more dominant, more alpha. Some hierarchies couldn't be overcome with rage or pride or even courage. They simply were. "I should kill you," Caleb said, and there was no anger in his voice, no rage, just statement of fact. "Pack law gives me that right. Blood law gives me that right. You've harmed a superior alpha. There is no defense for that." Osric's hand tightened on the dagger. For a moment, Seraphina thought he might actually try it, might lunge forward in a final act of desperate violence. But the blade fell from his fingers, clattering on the stone throne like an afterthought. "But I'm not you," Caleb said. He lowered his paw, those terrible claws retracting slightly. "The seers were right about my mother's blood, about what I'd become, but they were wrong about one thing." He leaned closer, until his muzzle was inches from Osric's face. "They thought celestial-born alphas don't understand hierarchy, that we want to tear it all down." Osric's breathing had gone shallow and rapid.
"We understand it perfectly," Caleb whispered. "We just build it differently." Then he did something no one expected. He turned away. The massive wolf form moved back toward the center of the hall, toward where Seraphina still lay catching her breath. The gathered pack members scrambled back, creating a wide circle around him. Several of the warriors, huge men who'd spent years mocking the weak pup, were openly weeping, overwhelmed by the pheromone pressure of a Titan Alpha's presence. Caleb stopped beside Seraphina, one golden paw extended toward her, claws retracted, palm up, an offer, not a command. Seraphina stared at that paw, easily the size of her torso, and saw in it everything that had just been proven: power without cruelty, strength with purpose. The protection she'd tried to offer him returned 1,000-fold. She took his paw. Caleb lifted her gently, carefully, as though she were made of glass. He set her on her feet, and then, in a gesture that made several wolves gasp, he lowered his massive head in a bow. "You broke the seal, not because you were ordered to, not because you had power or strength or any hope of reward. You did it because it was right." He raised his head, those burning eyes meeting hers. "In a world that measures worth by dominance, you chose compassion. That makes you stronger than anyone in this hall." Seraphina felt tears burning tracks down her face. Her voice came out broken. I just couldn't let him hurt you anymore." "I know." Caleb's voice softened, and for a moment she heard the boy he should have been, the child who'd been tortured for 3 years and had somehow, impossibly, emerged without becoming a monster. "And because of that, I'm going to give you a choice." He turned to face the full hall, his voice rising to address every wolf present. "I am Caleb, son of the celestial bloodline, born of silver and stars. By right of blood, by right of power, by right of survival, I claim the throne of Ironclaw." No one argued, no one even breathed. "But I will not rule as my father did. I will not build my reign on fear and cruelty. The old ways are ending." His eyes swept across the gathered wolves. "And all of you will decide, stay and help build something better, or leave and find a pack that still worships strength without wisdom." He looked down at Seraphina. "And you, the one who saved me, you'll have a choice too. Return to the life of a servant, forgotten and invisible, or—" His massive form began to shimmer, the golden light intensifying again, but not differently this time, not explosive, controlled. The 8-foot frame compressed, condensed, the fur receding and reshaping. In seconds, the Titan Alpha was gone. Standing in his place was a boy. Not the trapped pup form, his true human form, the one Osric's seal had prevented for 3 years. Caleb looked like any 10-year-old, thin, small, with messy golden hair and those same startling eyes. But the power hadn't vanished. It hummed beneath his skin like a sleeping dragon, present even when not displayed. He moved a small, very human hand toward Seraphina. "Or you could stand beside me, help me rebuild this pack into something that doesn't measure worth by the size of someone's teeth." Seraphina looked at that offered hand, at the boy who'd survived 3 years of torture and somehow remained kind, at the future standing before her in the form of a child who'd been forced to become a god. She knelt, not in submission, in acceptance. "I'm with you," she said simply, "whatever comes next." Caleb smiled, his first real smile in 3 years. "Then let's show them that the broken seal doesn't just release power." His eyes swept the hall, challenging anyone to disagree. "It releases truth, and truth always reshapes the world."
The Great Hall had never been silent like this. Even during the darkest executions, even during the most solemn packed rituals, there had always been sound, breathing, shuffling, the crackle of torches. But now, with Caleb standing in his human form before 300 wolves, the silence was so complete it felt like the world itself was holding its breath, waiting. The boy looked fragile in a way that made the previous display of power seem impossible. His tunic was torn where his body had expanded during transformation, hanging in tatters that exposed pale skin marked with golden scars. His feet were bare, his hair wild and unkempt. He looked like he should be in a sickbed, recovering, being cared for. Instead, he radiated authority that made grown alphas shake. Educational moment. Understanding Titan alphas. Titan-class alphas are born once every 3 to 4 generations, exclusively from celestial bloodlines, ancient werewolf families whose ancestry traces back to the original progenitors of the species. These wolves don't just command packs, they reshape entire territories. Historical records show that Titan alphas possess several unique characteristics. First, their power compounds over time rather than plateauing like normal wolves. Where a regular alpha reaches peak strength around age 30, Titan alphas continue growing stronger indefinitely. Second, they can suppress other alphas without physical contact. Their pheromone dominance is so overwhelming that wolves within 100 feet instinctively submit, unable to access their own wolf forms without permission. Third, and most importantly, they possess what ancient texts call the sovereign voice. When a Titan alpha speaks with true authority, their words carry compulsion that bypasses conscious thought and speaks directly to the wolf's soul. It's not mind control, it's deeper than that. It's the recognition that some hierarchies are written into the fabric of existence itself. Back to judgment. Caleb walked toward his father's throne with measured steps. Each footfall echoed in the silent hall. Warriors 3 times his size pressed themselves against walls to create space for his passage. Some were weeping openly now, not from sadness, but from sheer overwhelming presence, like standing too close to a bonfire and feeling your skin prickle from the heat. Osric remained on his throne, frozen between pride and terror. His hands gripped the armrests so tightly his knuckles had gone white. A vein pulsed in his temple. His jaw was clenched so hard Seraphina could hear his teeth grinding from 20 feet away. But he didn't run. Whatever else Osric was, torturer, murderer, tyrant, he wasn't a coward. He would face his judgment, even if that judgment came from the son he'd tried to destroy. "Stand up," Caleb said, quietly. It wasn't a request. The words carried that strange weight, that compulsion that made Osric's body respond before his mind could protest. The former Alpha King rose from his throne, on legs that trembled, standing at his full height, which was still considerable. 6 feet 2 inches of battle-hardened muscle and scarred flesh. Caleb was 10 years old and came up to his father's chest. Yet when they stood face to face, no one in the hall doubted who held the real power. "Do you know why you can't shift?" Caleb asked. Osric's jaw worked, but no sound emerged. His wolf, the source of his dominance, his identity, his entire sense of self, was locked away behind walls of instinctive submission. It knew what he refused to accept. The hierarchy had been rewritten. The alpha had been replaced. "It's not because I'm stopping you," Caleb continued, his young voice steady and almost gentle. "I'm simply here, and your wolf recognizes what that means." He gestured to the hall, to the 300 wolves pressed against walls and columns, all of them unable to meet his gaze directly. "This is what celestial blood does. This is what you were so afraid of. Not that I'd kill you, though I could. Not that I'd challenge you, though I would have won. You were afraid of this." He touched his own chest. "You were afraid that the moment I came into my power, every wolf in your pack would instinctively know that I was simply more." "You're a child," Osric rasped, finding his voice at last. "A child playing with forces you don't understand. Power without experience is just what you've been doing for 20 years, Caleb interrupted, and there was an edge to his voice now. Not anger, something colder.
Tell me, Father, when you embedded those silver wires in my spine, when you carved suppression runes into my flesh while I screamed, was that the action of someone with experience, or was that just cruelty dressed up as strategy? Osric's face flushed red, then drained to pale gray. The pack needed the pack needed an alpha who wasn't so terrified of being replaced that he tortured his own son. Caleb's eyes blazed brighter for a moment, gold overtaking the whites. Let me tell you what I learned during those 3 years, Father, while you were showing me what monsters look like. He stepped closer, and Osric actually flinched. I learned that strength isn't the same as power, that dominance isn't the same as leadership, that the loudest voice in the room is usually just compensating for being the weakest mind. His voice dropped to something barely above a whisper, yet everyone in the hall heard it clearly. I learned that true alphas don't rule through fear, they rule through trust, and trust, Father, is something you never understood. Caleb turned to face the gathered pack. All of you, look at him, really look at Alpha King Osric, the Iron Wolf, the unconquerable force who built this pack from 7 territories. His voice rang with command. Now, tell me, do you trust him? Silence. Not the odd silence from before. This was different. This was the silence of 300 wolves realizing they'd been living in fear for so long they'd forgotten what trust felt like. The silence of soldiers who'd followed orders without question, suddenly questioning everything. No one spoke in Osric's defense. No one even tried. Caleb nodded slowly, as though this confirmed something he'd already known. Then judgment is simple, he said. Father, you took my wolf from me for 3 years. You tried to make me powerless, voiceless, weak. Now I'm going to take yours, permanently. Osric's eyes widened in horror. No, you can't. Pack law states that an alpha cannot be stripped of his wolf unless he harmed a superior alpha. Which you did, for 3 years, systematically, with intention and premeditation. He smiled, and it was not a kind smile. Your own law condemns you, Father. How poetic. Wait, Osric started, and for the first time, genuine fear cracked through his facade. Please, you don't understand what you're doing. I understand perfectly, Caleb said, and reached out with one small human hand toward his father's chest.
Caleb's hand hovered over Osric's chest, palm flat, fingers spread. He wasn't touching the man. There was perhaps an inch of space between skin and fabric, but Osric's entire body had gone rigid as though struck by lightning. "Do you feel that?" Caleb asked softly. Osric's mouth opened, closed. No words emerged, but his expression answered clearly. Yes, he felt it. The connection between his human consciousness and his wolf's soul being grasped by something infinitely stronger, like a rope held by a giant. "That's your wolf," Caleb explained, his voice taking on that dual quality again, child and ancient being speaking as one. "I can feel it inside you, terrified, desperate, trying to hide in the deepest part of your soul where it thinks I can't reach." His fingers curled slightly, as though gripping something invisible. Osric gasped, a sound of pure agony ripping from his throat. "But there's nowhere to hide from a Titan Alpha," Caleb continued. "When celestial blood reaches this level of power, we don't just command wolves, we can touch the bond itself, the sacred connection between human and beast that defines our entire species." Serafina watched, transfixed and horrified in equal measure. She'd never seen anything like this. The other wolves in the hall looked equally disturbed. This went beyond normal pack dynamics, beyond challenge fights and dominance displays. This was something primal being manipulated, something that should have been impossible. "You wanted to know what my mother's bloodline was capable of," Caleb said, and for the first time, emotion crept into his voice. Not anger, grief. "You killed her because you were afraid, pushed her down those stairs when she tried to stop you from hurting me, called it an accident, made sure no one questioned the Alpha's story." Osric's eyes went wide.
How did you—" "I remember everything," Caleb whispered. "I was 7 years old. I was there. I saw you do it." Tears traced lines down his young face, but his hand remained steady. "And then you spent 3 years making sure I could never tell anyone, making sure I stayed locked in a form that couldn't speak, couldn't accuse, couldn't seek justice." His grip tightened. Osric screamed. It wasn't a sound of physical pain, it was deeper, more fundamental, the sound of something essential being torn away. Every wolf in the hall flinched at that scream, their own connections to their wolves suddenly feeling vulnerable, exposed. "My mother's name," Caleb said, his voice cutting through Osric's screams, "was Elena Shadowmere, daughter of the celestial line, bearer of the lunar crown, and the rightful Luna of this pack." His eyes blazed like twin suns. "Say her name." I can't," Osric choked. "Say her name." The command reverberated through the hall with physical force. Several wolves cried out, pressing hands to their ears. "Elena," Osric sobbed. "Her name was Elena. And what did you do to her?" Tears and sweat mixed on Osric's face. His proud bearing had completely shattered. I pushed her. I killed her. I murdered my mate because I was afraid of what her son would become." The confession hung in the air like poison gas. Caleb nodded slowly. Truth, finally, after 3 years of lies. His hand began to glow with that golden light, the same light that had shattered the suppression seal. "Now, let me show you what those 3 years felt like." From Caleb's glowing palm, thin threads of golden energy emerged. They moved like living things, serpentine and purposeful, extending toward Osric's chest. When they touched fabric, the cloth simply dissolved, exposing skin beneath. And then the golden threads dove into Osric's flesh, not cutting, weaving. The former Alpha King's screams intensified as the golden wires, mirror images of the blackened silver that had bound Caleb, wove themselves through his skin in the exact same pattern. Same knots, same spacing, same agonizing precision. But these wires didn't just suppress, they extracted. Where the threads embedded themselves, Osric's power began to drain away. Not his wolf, that was being held in place, forced to watch its own execution. His physical strength, his enhanced senses, his accelerated healing, every gift that werewolf blood provided was being systematically stripped away. The silver wires that had once bound Caleb, now reduced to ash on the floor, began to swirl in the air like smoke caught in a vortex. The ash reformed, reconstituted into solid metal again, drawn by Caleb's power. The blackened silver rose from the ground and joined the golden threads, weaving themselves into Osric's flesh. Punishment and symmetry combined. "You used my own suppression to drain power into the earth," Caleb said, his voice eerily calm as his father writhed in agony. "But yours will drain into something else, something permanent." The wires completed the pattern, forming a perfect replica of what had been done to Caleb, except for one crucial difference. At the center, where the master knot would have been, Caleb carved something new into Osric's flesh with threads of light. A symbol, a rune of his own design. When it was finished, Caleb pulled his hand back, the golden light faded. Osric collapsed to his knees, gasping, his entire body trembling with shock. He looked smaller. The powerful alpha physique had deflated slightly, like a balloon losing air. His eyes, once cold and calculating, now held only very human fear. He tried to stand, stumbled, fell again. Weak. What did you do to me?" Osric rasped. "I made you what you pretended I was, powerless. Your wolf is still there, you can feel it, can't you? But you'll never shift again, never heal faster than a human, never feel the strength you took for granted. And everyone who looks at you will see exactly what you are, a man who tortured his own son and murdered his own mate, stripped of the power that let him pretend he was something more than a monster." Caleb turned to address the full pack. "This is the justice of the new Iron Claw. Not execution, not exile, but truth made visible." His voice rang with authority. Osric will live among us as a servant, the same role he forced upon those he deemed beneath him. He will clean the halls he once ruled, he will serve the meals he once commanded, and every day he will remember what he lost and why. He looked down at his father, who was now truly on his knees, bound by wires of his own cruelty. Caleb said, "You wanted me to learn about strength, father. You wanted to teach me that power is everything." Caleb's expression held no triumph, no satisfaction, only a terrible, sad wisdom. So here's my lesson. Power without mercy is just cruelty with a crown, and cruelty eventually devours itself. The hall erupted in howls, not of protest, but of affirmation. The sound was primal, cathartic, the collective release of 300 wolves who'd lived under tyranny and were finally free. Osric knelt in his fallen glory, stripped of everything he'd built his identity upon, and wept. Seraphina, watching from the edge of the crowd, felt tears on her own face. Not for Osric, for the boy who'd suffered enough to understand justice, but had somehow retained enough humanity to temper it with wisdom.
Dawn broke over Ironclaw 3 days after the solstice feast. The great hall had been cleaned. The ash from the shattered suppression wires had been swept away. The scorch marks on the stone floor from Caleb's transformation had been scrubbed, though the marks remained, permanent reminders etched into the foundation itself. Some things, once changed, could never be fully erased. Caleb stood on the steps of the throne, not on the throne itself, not yet. He wore simple clothes, a tunic that actually fit his 10-year-old frame, clean trousers, boots that didn't pinch. His golden hair had been washed and trimmed. He looked, for the first time in 3 years, like a child. Except for the eyes. Those would never be just a child's eyes again. The pack had gathered again, but the atmosphere was completely different from the solstice feast. No forced celebration, no performative dominance. Just wolves standing together, waiting to see what their new alpha would say. Seraphina stood beside him, not behind, beside, wearing clothes that had been gifted to her by wolves whose names she'd never bothered to learn because servants weren't supposed to matter. A deep blue dress that marked her as someone important, someone valued. Caleb had insisted. 3 days ago, Caleb began, his voice clear and steady. This pack was called Ironclaw, a name that spoke of strength, dominance, the closed fist. And for a time, that name made sense. It kept us strong. It kept us feared. He paused, looking out over the assembled wolves. But fear isn't loyalty, and strength isn't the same as resilience. His hand touched the place where the suppression wires had been, where golden scars now traced patterns across his skin beneath the tunic. I learned that the hard way. I learned that you can survive breaking, that the fire that doesn't kill you doesn't just make you stronger, it changes what strength means. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. This woman, Caleb gestured to Seraphina, had no power, no rank, no strength by the old measure, but she had something more important. She had courage. The courage to do what was right even when it would cost her everything. His eyes swept the pack. That's the kind of strength I want to build this pack around. Not the strength to dominate, but the strength to protect. Not the strength to instill fear, but the strength to inspire trust. He descended the steps, moving among the crowd. Wolves parted respectfully, but didn't press themselves against walls, didn't cower. They looked at him with something new in their expressions. Hope. So I'm renaming us. We're no longer Ironclaw. From this day forward, we are the Pack of the Golden Heart. The name hung in the air. Some wolves looked uncertain. It wasn't a fierce name, not a name that spoke of battle and conquest, but others were nodding, understanding dawning in their eyes. A golden heart, Caleb continued, a heart that's been through fire and emerged refined.
a heart that knows pain but chooses compassion, a heart that's strong enough to be gentle. He stopped in front of a massive warrior, one of the men who'd kicked him repeatedly over the years. His face was streaked with tears. "I forgive you," Caleb said simply. The warrior collapsed to his knees. "I don't deserve—" "No one deserves forgiveness," Caleb interrupted gently. "That's why it's a gift, not a reward. You were taught that cruelty was strength. Now I'm teaching you differently. The question is, will you learn?" "Yes," the warrior sobbed. "Yes, Alpha." Caleb moved through the pack, speaking words of forgiveness, of new beginnings, of chances to be better than what they'd been forced to become. And with each interaction, the energy in the hall shifted from the tense anticipation of more punishment to something warmer, more hopeful. By the time he returned to the steps, every wolf in the hall was standing straighter, breathing easier. "The old laws are over. We will not measure worth by who can fight hardest. We will measure it by who lifts others up. Omegas will have voices in pack decisions. Servants will be treated with dignity. Children will be protected, not tested." His voice rang with absolute authority. "And anyone who cannot live by these new laws is free to leave. I won't force anyone to stay, but if you stay, you follow the golden heart." No one left. Caleb smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his face from wise beyond his years to simply young. "Then let's get to work. We have a pack to rebuild." The hall erupted in howls again, but these were different from 3 nights ago. These were howls of celebration, of relief, of new purpose. The sound echoed off the stone walls and carried out into the morning air, spreading across the territory like a declaration. Everything had changed. Epilogue. That night, when the pack had dispersed to their homes and duties, Seraphina found Caleb standing alone on the castle battlements, looking out over the forest that bordered their territory. "Can't sleep?" she asked gently. "I keep thinking about what comes next. The other packs will hear about this, about me. Some will want to challenge a child alpha, test whether I'm really as strong as the stories will claim. Are you afraid?" "No." He turned to her, and in the moonlight, those golden eyes glowed softly. "I'm hopeful, because every pack that challenges me is a pack that might learn a better way." He smiled. "My mother used to say that celestial-born weren't meant to rule through domination. We were meant to be examples, living proof that strength and compassion aren't opposites." "She would be proud of you," Seraphina said. "I hope so." Caleb looked back out at the forest. "But there's something else. When I broke the suppression seal, I felt something. Like the wires weren't just holding me back, they were broadcasting, sending a signal to somewhere far away." Seraphina felt a chill run down her spine. Broadcasting what? That a Titan Alpha had been found, suppressed, vulnerable. His expression grew serious. Someone was watching Seraphina. Someone wanted to know when my power was sealed away, which means they'll know now that it's been released. "Should we prepare for an attack?" "We should prepare for war," Caleb corrected quietly. "Not all enemies fight with claws and teeth. Some fight with politics, manipulation, power plays that span territories." He clenched his small fists. "My father was a monster, but he was a small monster, local, the kind of evil that festers in one place." He turned to face her fully. "But whoever was tracking those suppression wires, they're playing a much bigger game, and we just became pieces on their board." In the distance, far beyond the borders of what used to be Ironclaw territory, a wolf howled, then another, then dozens more, the sound carrying on the wind like a warning, or a summons. Caleb straightened, his posture shifting from thoughtful child to commanding alpha in an instant. "Let them come," he said softly. The seal is broken, the silence is over, and anyone who thinks a Titan Alpha is easy prey just because he's young, his eyes blazed gold in the darkness, is about to learn why my bloodline was feared for 1,000 years. Would you like to hear more of this story? If so, please let me know in the comments. Like if this story gave you chills, made you cry, or made you believe in heroes again. Subscribe to join the pack of the Golden Heart. I've got more stories like this coming, and you do not want to miss them. Share this with someone who needs to hear that being kind doesn't make you weak, it makes you unstoppable. Never mistake silence for weakness. Never assume that a suppressed flame has gone out, because when the seal is broken, the fire doesn't just return, it burns brighter than anyone imagined possible. Power is loudest in those who've learned to be quiet, and the strongest hearts are the ones that survived being broken.